Souls Unitarian Universalist Church, building community, inspiring growth, creating change. Here in the heart of Kansas City, we come together to create this hour of shared reflection so that we might be renewed in courage for these times and inspired to lives of greater dignity, higher purpose, deeper generosity, and more effective action. If you are new to Unitarian Universalism or to our congregation, we want to get to know you and share part of your journey. If this place is already your spiritual home, welcome once more. We need one another, and it is good to be together again. Because we care for one another's safety, our congregation is gathering online during this long season of coronavirus pandemic. Nevertheless, through the gifts of technology, we continue to celebrate community and connections as we lean into the values of justice, compassion, and reason. Together, we learn the love that has the power to overcome both loneliness in the heart and oppression in the world. Welcome to our service this morning. May the words and music and images that we offer today nourish our best selves, calling forth abundant wisdom and love. Arise, our souls,
Good morning, and welcome to this virtual gathering of the All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Kansas City on October 24th, 2021, coming to you live from Bragg Auditorium as we address the technological issues of preparing to return to dual-platform in-person services next month. Please bear with us. There is no choice but to immerse ourselves in the stream of history. We have no option but to embrace our location in time, to breathe in with shared memories and hopes all the contaminations of tradition. It is inevitable to become defined by this cause, by that party, by this emergency. To outgrow the past, but not to extinguish it. To be progressive, but not raw. Free, but not mad. Critical, but not sterile. Expectant, but not deluded. This is the goal. Failure to accept responsibility, refusal to take a stand on vital issues, timid rejection of the ties of a true belonging as if they were false identity. These are denials of life. In effect, they are deeds of death. To be scientific, but not cut off from life by formulas, to listen amidst the clamor of propaganda for the pure, deep tones of the Spirit, to seek the wisdom that liberates and the loyalty that consecrates, to turn both prosperity and adversity into servants of character, to be governed by principle and not by circumstance, to understand the times in which we live, to add our weight to the scales on the side of human kinship and equality within authentic differences. This is life with depth and meaning. This is the one eternity worth having. As the weeks and months of this pandemic season unfold, These words from Ernest Hocking and William Sullivan ring ever more true. We cannot escape the demands of our moment in history, and as much as we shape it, it shapes us. For this hour, we turn our attention to another history of which we are a living part, the 60th anniversary year of the founding of the Unitarian Universalist Association, as it brought together two denominations with differing theological origins, but carrying a common commitment to the disciplines of human freedom, reason, and kinship. We who are part of this community today are the heirs of that union. And it is fitting that we should pause to remember its origins in the stream of history and the contaminations of tradition, to embrace the ties of our true belonging and the loyalty that consecrates us in covenant together in these days. In celebration of what is most noble in our past and most hopeful in our future, we kindle once again this flaming chalice. May it be to us a symbol of shared humanity and a beacon of welcome to all who seek a world of peace, justice, and more abundant life. I invite us to share in the chat the place where your chalice flame is lighted this morning.
Now let's join together in speaking once again our covenant promises to this community. Together we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people of many paths who are brave, curious, and compassionate thinkers and doers. Every day, people are inundated with information, overwhelmed by demands, and pulled by a culture that seeks to divide us from the web of life. Unitarian Universalism reconnects, bringing people together with meaning and inspiration. We are a house without walls, a congregation without spiritual limits, and a movement that calls you to put more faith in yourself, your community, and your beliefs. We are a faith that honors your mind, your heart, your journey. Simply put, we are a guided path towards a better you and a better world. Grounded in hundreds of years of thoughtful religious communities, we are people of many generations, ethnicities, genders and sexualities, and spiritual backgrounds. People engaged in making the world a better place. People focusing on what really matters: love, justice, integrity, and hope. Unitarian Universalists have different beliefs, but shared values. We are Unitarian Universalists, and at the same time, we may also be agnostic, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, humanist, Jewish, Muslim, pagan, atheist, believers in God, and those who let the great mystery be. The diversity of beliefs you'll find in a Unitarian Universalist community is one of our strengths. We're always learning how to see the world from a different perspective. What unites us are our core principles that uphold 7 real-world values: believing in the worthiness of every person, showing compassion and fairness, accepting others for who they are, growing through a personal search for truth, leading with democratic spirit, working for justice, and understanding that everything is interconnected. 7 days a week, Unitarian Universalists live these principles by doing. When we gather, we worship, reflect, and remind ourselves what matters most in life. Whatever our age, we learn to live with more wisdom, more awareness, more gratitude, and more soul. We show our values by showing up to answer the call for social justice. We have a track record of standing on the side of love for civil rights, LGBTQ equality, immigration reform, environmental sustainability, reproductive justice, racial justice, and more. Find what it means to live your deepest values out loud. Join us on this extraordinary adventure of faith.
Persecution and died, that we might have the opportunity of freely and openly supporting the churches of our authentic faith. Voluntary support of the church's holy purposes is a holy act, and it ought to be done accordingly. In this spirit, our offering for this morning will now be gratefully received.
storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging, since love prevails in heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing?
Let's say together the words of dedication. Our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
May 12, 1961, the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America, having separately ratified their previous decisions to consolidate their institutional operations into the Unitarian Universalist Association, held a joint service of celebration to formally recognize their new organization. As part of that observance, they recalled elements of both their unique and shared histories. Today, we listen again to these voices of our heritage, reminding us of the long roots of our faith and the many sacrifices that have been made over the centuries by our spiritual ancestors so that we might practice our beliefs in freedom, authenticity, and growing inclusiveness.
Voices of Our Heritage, from the celebration of consolidation of the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America, 1960. Throughout all generations, people have longed to be free.
And many have died that freedom might come to be.
They have rotted in prisons. They have died at the stake and on the cross.
Some have broken and recanted, and others died screaming of the torture.
Some have lived and taught, and their words and deeds light up the darkness of history with a glorious brightness.
Because of them, free individuals have learned to stand together, not cowering in fear, not huddled and silent and afraid, but standing straight and tall.
Each life may burn with its own light and not be quenched, even though its light be different. In a community where the power of each in their integrity can be the strength of all.
Standing today at a great moment and historic milestone in our long journey, deeply aware of the past that is present in us, and confronted by arduous tasks which command all that we are and have. We are Unitarian Universalists, the spiritual free people of this hour. Pause not to praise the forebearers of freedom's cause, those who by their courage and prophetic vision gave us our goodly heritage and laid the foundations of our newfound faith.
Michael Servetus, man of the lion heart, who stood alone and wrote and preached, in season and out, and was burned at the stake in the flames of his own books for the belief that God is one.
Editor and doctor, as well as theologian, he sought the restoration of Christianity to its early simplicity and the reformation of the church as a servant of humanity.
Jan Hus, who in Bohemia sounded the call for freedom of theological thought before the coming of the Reformation.
In the face of warnings, he perished and died, a martyr for his faith.
Francis David, transcendent orator of the Spirit, who in Transylvania won the world's first edict of religious toleration in an age of intolerance, made a Unitarian king, and built a free church which has flourished for 400 years.
No man should ever be prosecuted for his religious faith, he said, for faith is the gift of God.
Joseph Priestley, scientist, minister, humanitarian, who fought for religious freedom in his native England and carried the fire of liberalism to the shores of America.
He preached out boldly what he thought, without apology or hesitation, defending and urging his views ably and fearlessly, and put courage into the hearts of the liberal dissenters.
We remember with gratitude John Murray, Benjamin Rush, and George de Benneville, who in the 18th century left the security of orthodoxy to raise the banner of universal salvation and the uncompromised goodness and graciousness of God.
Founders of the Universalist Brethren, they set the first stones in the edifice of American liberalism.
We remember with gratitude Charles Chauncey and Jonathan Mayhew, Henry Ware Jr., William Ellery Channing, and Theodore Parker, who led our American ancestors out of the theological wilderness and summoned them to belief in the perfectibility of humanity.
They laid the foundation and reared the structure of American Unitarianism and put it to work in every cause of human service. They struck the fetters from the bodies and minds of people.
I call that mind free, Channing said, which jealously guards its intellectual rights and powers, which calls no man master, which does not content itself with a passive or hereditary faith, which opens itself to light whensoever it may come, which receives new truth as an angel from heaven, which, whilst consulting others, inquires still more of the oracle within itself, and uses instructions from abroad not to supersede, but to quicken and exalt its own energies.
I call that mind free, which sets no bounds to its love, which is not imprisoned in itself or in a sect, which recognizes in all human beings the image of God and the rights of God's children.
Virtue is no local thing. It is not honorable because born in this community or that, but for its own independent, everlasting beauty. This is the bond of the Universal Church. No one can be excommunicated from it but by himself, by the death of goodness in his own breast.
We remember with gratitude Hosea Ballou, who made Universalism Unitarian and mightily advanced the cause of rational religion.
His method was dignified and noble. His spirit was Christian. His practical teaching was wise and effective. He went to the people. He argued like Socrates. He pleaded like Paul. He was as serene as the firmament. It was Ballou who said, "If we agree in brotherly love, there is no disagreement can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good."
And Ballou spoke for theological honesty. Would it not be as well, after so long a time, and when the public, and especially our own Orthodox brethren, can no longer be deceived, to come out boldly and own the truth and the whole truth? Be sure it would make some noise in the world, but what of it? Brethren, I adjure you to come directly into the open ground and defend the truth, that the truth may defend you.
We remembered with gratitude Ralph Waldo Emerson, who made Unitarianism Universalist, and from the pulpit and platform all over his land proclaimed the mighty power of the human spirit and the universality of truth.
Attach not thyself to the Christian symbol, he said, but to the moral sentiment which carries innumerable Christianities, humanities, and divinities in its bosom.
Go alone. Refuse the good models, even those which are sacred in the imagination of others, and dare to love God without mediator or veil. Yourself a newborn bard of the Holy Ghost, cast behind you all conformity and acquaint men at first hand with deity.
We remember with gratitude the pioneers who almost a century ago sounded the call for a universal free fellowship, open to all seekers of truth and goodwill of whatever background of faith.
And what shall we say more? Of how many others must we not speak?
Of Clara Barton and Dorothea Dix,
Of Augusta Chapin, Charles Osborne, and John Murray Spear.
Of Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Paine.
of Joseph Tuckerman and William Channing Gannett,
Of Samuel Joseph May and Horace Mann.
of Isaac Morgan Atwood, Lee Sullivan McAllister, and Clarence Skinner,
Of the Elliots, A. Powell Davies and John Haynes Holmes.
All these have been prophets of a new dawn of freedom, pioneers of a universal community of free minds, builders of the kinship of humanity.
Seeing that we are compassed round by so great a cloud of witnesses, the great past and present, and all the humble heroes who worked and sacrificed beside them, who indeed held up their hands and made strong their voices, let us now, in our own day, lay aside every weight of selflessness and fear, and take up with faith and joy the urgent tasks to which this historic hour has summoned us.
Let
Let
us
us
together
together build a free and universal church of tomorrow.
Past, Present, Future by the Reverend Frederick May Elliott. O thou, to whom our forebears built their altars in the ancient days, upon our worship we invoke the benediction of their praise. As then their reverence hearts received the Spirit's gift of flame from thee, so on our altars kindle now fires of ancestral piety. That living, radiant inward light which we today but dimly see, our guide amid the world we know, our hope for what is yet to be, shall break in greater majesty upon the minds and hearts that crave, with widening knowledge of the truth, triumphant power to seek and save. Sunrise of ages yet unborn, whose clearer presence then shall shine, when all the world shall live in peace and human life become divine. Oh, touch our lips, that we may be the messengers of larger right, with prophet power to proclaim the growing purpose of the light.
disco ball mirrored on the inside. Each of those associations reflects and flashes off the others. The more complex, ambiguous, and multifaceted the various images are, the more dazzling and powerful the symbol. If an object just means one and only one thing, then it's a sign, but not a symbol. The flaming chalice is like that for me, vastly overdetermined, freighted with many meanings and memories, all orbiting together around how Unitarian Universalism shapes my life. Today, as we celebrate over 60 years of the existence of this particular, if not peculiar, religious institution, it may be appropriate to unpack some of the layers that symbol has acquired as our living tradition has gradually embraced it over the past 6 decades. And it is worth remembering as we go about this that symbols are like that, like the tradition we honor, like the flame of the chalice itself. They are living things. They grow and change. Their meanings deepen and are enriched by the experiences we share. We didn't start out with a flaming chalice, you know. There was no chalice lighting at that joint worship service in 1961, celebrating the decision of the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America to formally consolidate their operations. They had a candle made of 2 wax columns twisted together with 1 wick that a representative of each organization lighted together from separate flames, sort of like the unity candle in a wedding ceremony, which it kind of was in a way. The specific image of the chalice had not yet permeated the community, for in truth, the community did not yet really exist. It would come to be over the decades that followed, as the 2 traditions became truly one in a shared future. But there was fire, of course. There had to be fire, for it was a sacred moment. And fire has always been part of our sense of the sacred, as far back as human consciousness goes. This is one layer of the chalice for me, that I am connected to my most primitive ancestors and every human culture throughout the ages that has been fascinated by the power and danger of fire. We know now that other animals do make tools, but no other species has made a servant of this volatile natural force. No other creatures dare to bring flame into their dwellings, to the center of their communities, to risk its menace for the sake of the advantages that it offers. Fire gives light for human eyes that have been bred to blindness in the dark. Fire gives warmth to our vulnerable, hairless bodies. Fire enables us to cook food, to work metal, to kill germs. Fire disposes of our trash, and sometimes even of our worn-out bodies when we are done with them. But fire is a perilous proposition. It must always be approached with caution. Uncontrolled, it destroys, both in the natural world and among human artifacts. Perhaps this is why it has so often been associated with the human perception of the holy. Fire, the gift of the gods, or stolen from the gods, depending on your legend, is like the gods, arbitrary, dangerously powerful, requiring cautious tending if we are to realize its benefits. Fire can hurt us badly, even kill. At our worst, we do that to each other, and the fiery martyrs will figure in our story presently. Even in such controlled circumstances as our own worship services, fire gives us a little rush of anxiety. Will the flame kindle when we invite it? Will it stay safely within the vessel in the space we have set apart for it? Fire is atavistically beautiful. We have no choice. Our eyes are drawn to flame, not just out of caution, but also in pleasure. There is something soothing and centering and joyful about watching a flame, whether on a hearth or a birthday cake or a candlelight procession. Fire seems alive as we are alive. In every age and society, its pull has brought us together in need and celebration and human kinship. When I look at our flaming chalice, I feel the response of a common humanity that connects me to my earliest forebears and to all people everywhere. I also remember a very specific little girl going to Sunday school in a big room divided with burlap partitions, listening to stories of Martin and Judy, learning to be a Unitarian Universalist. There was one other child at my school besides my brother and sister who went to our church. None of them was in my grade. The family across the street from us was Roman Catholic, and I remember 2 of those girls making their first communion. Many of my schoolmates wore necklaces with crosses. There might have been a Star of David or 2 also. I knew that those were not for me, that what the cross stood for was not what I believed. What I didn't understand was why I shouldn't have a necklace of my own to represent what I did believe in. In those days, there was one jeweler, as I recall, he lived in Dearborn, Michigan, who produced one image of the flaming chalice. You could get it relatively small or tiny, as a pin or a pendant, in gold, sterling silver, or rhodium plated. And I was deeply thrilled when my parents gave me a silver flaming chalice necklace, and I wore it more or less constantly for years, including on my wedding day. After I was married, I had it made into a bracelet, and I have it still. As a child in grade school, I could not have told you a great deal about the history or meaning of the chalice symbol, but to me it meant one very important thing, that I belonged. I had a community of people who supported each other in not having all the answers, but being sure there was no hell, who thought that religion was about doing justice and loving other people and being loyal to the truth, who believed that what was most precious in life was found in the beauty of nature and our compassion for each other. Even then, you see, the symbol was overdetermined. Whenever I touched that pendant, all those ideas were part of what I remembered. My childhood would have been sadder and more lonely without that tangible image to comfort and inspire me. It reminded me both that I was not alone and that I and my community held specific hopes for the kind of person I was trying to become. But there was no flaming chalice lighted on Sunday mornings in the Unitarian Universalist congregation of my childhood. There is now in that same church, but back then it was not something that anyone seems to have thought of. The flaming chalice, in its Unitarian Universalist origins, belonged very specifically to one organization, and it was only gradually after the merger in 1961 that it began to be recognized as a symbol for all of the new association. Many of you probably remember the story of Waitstill and Martha Sharp, who were recognized in 2005 as the second and third Americans inscribed in the Garden of the Righteous at Yad Vashem in Israel. But their work rescuing Jews and liberal political activists as the shadow of Hitler's Third Reich fell over Europe, they were appointed by the American Unitarian Association immediately after the Munich Pact left Czechoslovakia in Nazi hands. The Sharps were given $28,000 and sent to assist the Unitarian Church in Prague to cope with the expanding flow of refugees asking for assistance. In 1939, they set up a network of academic and political connections that enabled them to smuggle hundreds of endangered Czech citizens and others out of Prague. They escaped themselves only a day before their scheduled arrest by the Gestapo. The following year, they returned to Lisbon and Marseille, where they again assisted and escorted children as well as controversial artists and intellectuals out of harm's way. In 1941, their place was taken by another Unitarian minister, Charles Joy, who continued their dangerous work under the auspices of a newly formed organization called the Unitarian Service Committee. One of the refugees that Charles Joy assisted was an Austrian artist and graphic designer named Hans Deutsch, who had been living in Paris during the previous decade, drawing political cartoons that ridiculed Hitler and the Nazis. When Charles Joy decided that the Unitarian Service Committee needed to be able to produce official-looking documents that would command the respect of government bureaucrats and inspectors, he turned to Hans Deutsch to design a distinctive logo appropriate to their mission. When a document may keep a man out of jail or give him standing with governments and police, it is important that it have dignity, that it look official and important, wrote Joy. Thinking back to the altars of the ancient Greeks and Romans, Deutsch produced an image of a chalice of holy oil with a flame burning at its center. This two-dimensional icon would become the logo for the Unitarian Service Committee for the remainder of the war, and afterwards, following its merger with the Universalist Service Committee of the UU Service Committee that we know today, whose continuing work we celebrated just last week. That logo, in various forms, was used by the nascent Unitarian Universalist Association, initially pictured surrounded by a double circle, which referenced the coming together of the two traditions. As they redesigned older mastheads that had sometimes included images of crosses, individual churches within the new association began to use the chalice icon as well. It was not until I was in seminary in the late 70s that I remember the first three-dimensional chalice, created in pewter and sold as a fundraiser by the UU Service Committee. The pictorial image had begun to come to life. The flame was no longer a drawing, but a living reality, marking a time of focus and celebration with its light. The chalice itself suggests at least three different references to elements of our history. The first, which Deutsch himself named, is in the chalice image of antiquity, before the beginning of the Christian era. Feminist theologians in the late 20th century would seek to reclaim this neo-pagan image as an archetype of the divine female, the womb-like receptive and holding vessel, over against the male archetype of the blade. It is not necessary to endorse dubious archaeology to agree that the image of the cup, possibly filled with something precious and or flaming like a lamp, is vastly older than Christianity. The second reference of the chalice is, of course, to the wine of Jesus' Last Supper and the subsequent ritual of the Eucharist in Christian churches. To whatever extent we may or may not appreciate them today, the historical roots of both Unitarianism and Universalism are firmly planted in the Christian tradition, but never in an uncritical acceptance of that heritage. For the third reference of the chalice and its flame takes us back to the beginning of the 15th century, about 100 years prior to the start of the Protestant Reformation in Europe. At that time, a Czech priest and theologian at the University of Prague named Jan Hus became convinced by the radical ideas of John Wycliffe in England and began to teach his students and parishioners that the Bible should be available to ordinary people in the languages that they actually spoke and understood, as well as that the cup of communion wine should be offered to all the faithful and not just reserved exclusively for the priests. Hus questioned the authority of the Pope. As well he might, since in his day there were 3 competing claimants to that office, and the practice of selling indulgences. He also maintained that the true church was constituted not by any official hierarchy, but by all the gathered people of God. Many of these ideas would survive to influence the later reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin, but in Hus's time they were condemned by both ecclesiastical and secular powers. Ultimately, unwilling to recant from his beliefs and refusing to cease sharing the chalice of communion wine with everyone present at Mass, he was executed by burning alive at the stake, along with his own and Wycliffe's writings in 1415. His followers then fought the only successful campaign for religious liberty against the Catholic Church before the separation of Luther more than a century later. Our chalice is a legacy from the hands of Jan Hus, reminding us both that whatever may be holy, it is the common property of all humanity, never to be reserved for any special elite. And also that our religious liberty is a costly legacy, sometimes realized only by extraordinary sacrifice on the part of those who are loyal to its vision. The flame of martyrdom for questioning religious orthodoxy continues in the more familiar story of Michael Servetus, burned for heresy, the heresy of arguing that the doctrine of the Trinity was an error. Burned not by the Catholic Church, but by the reformer John Calvin in Geneva in 1553. The flame of our flaming chalice is not merely the cheerful hearth fire of community. It is also the burning memory of the dangers in human persecution of others and an eternal warning against intolerance and tyranny. On the Universalist side, the flaming chalice speaks to the fear that was evoked in so many people by the idea of burning forever in a lake of fire after death. At various times during the Christian hegemony over Western Europe, voices of compassionate theologians and mystics have been raised to assert that this notion was nonsense, that no loving God could participate in creating a universe where such thing as eternal damnation in hell was possible. Yet it was not until the rise of the pietistic movements of Quakerism and Methodism in the 18th century that the doctrine of universal salvation, that no soul is estranged from God or made to suffer forever, became the center of an organized religious community. The flame of today's chalice reminds me that too many people still live in religions of fear and still long to hear the universalist good news of our free faith, that all humanity shares a common origin and a common destiny, that love and wholeness are possible for everyone. The fires of hell are nothing but a figment of our worst collective imagination, and only the powers that lead to love and compassion are worthy of our worship. The doctrine of universalism arose in part out of the 18th century European Enlightenment, as Christian orthodoxy at last lost its stronghold on the philosophical and scientific progress of Western culture. The flame has always been a symbol of learning and the advance of knowledge. And the Enlightenment movement took its name from the sense that a new light was breaking in human understanding. When the authority of reason and empirical evidence replaced that of tradition and revelation, whole new horizons of knowledge began to open, and people came to realize that we have the power to guide our own collective well-being. Advances in medicine and technology relieved some of the oldest human drudgeries and fears. Literacy opened the world of ideas to ordinary people, and the concept of democracy offered a viable alternative to the age-old oppression of the humble by the strong and ruthless. Undoubtedly, these changes brought confusion and resistance, as well as their own inevitable excesses. But they created civilization as we know it today, with the enduring ideals of liberty, equality, justice, and peace for all people. The light of our chalice flame proclaims that we are the heirs and guardians of those Enlightenment ideals, that as our freedom is precious to us, we must be vigilant to protect it from its would-be usurpers in our own time. Despite all these dimensions, though, the flaming chalice might have remained merely the letterhead ornament of a relatively obscure social service organization if the merger of the Unitarian and Universalist churches in 1961 had not created a new religious community in search of a suitable symbol. It had been, as some observers described it, a very long courtship. The first resolution offered before a meeting of the American Unitarian Association suggesting merger with the Universalist was proposed in 1865, almost a full century before that merger would actually happen. Part of the hesitation was theological on both sides. By the end of the Civil War, the Unitarians were moving through transcendentalism and rational religion away from exclusive dependence on the Bible and Jesus, rather faster than the Universalists were, even though they were on pretty much the same path in the long run. But perhaps a greater part of the resistance was institutional, economic, and political. The Universalist state conventions enjoyed much greater autonomy and endowments, while the Unitarians were somewhat more centralized. Both groups feared that their unique histories and messages would be subsumed by the other and ultimately lost. Nevertheless, there had long been members of the Universalist Church who were Unitarian in their theological beliefs, and official Unitarians who were Universalist by conviction. It was Thomas Starr King, a minister who served churches in both traditions in the mid-19th century in California, who famously observed that the Universalists believe that God is too good to damn them, while the Unitarians believe that they are too good to be damned. He captured something of the personality of each group, but in the end, it came to the same thing. More important, it seems to me, was the matching strand that both drew from their history as heretical movements. Whether it had to do with the errors of the Trinity or the inclusiveness of salvation, both groups had early in their respective developments determined that there was no point in trying to tell lies to God. It was useless, worse than useless, they both taught, to go stand in church and recite the words of creeds that you didn't actually believe or you didn't understand. You might deceive human beings by doing this, but you couldn't fool an omnipotent God. Better to tell the truth as your own conscience understood it, to say plainly what you really believed about the will and work of the Creator, who knew perfectly well what you were thinking anyway. Once you establish this principle at the center of your religious community, two consequences inevitably follow. First, you have opened the door to continual theological innovation. For if people tell the truth about where their thinking is leading them, they will discover over time that they change their minds. New information and new ideas will always be circulating in the environment. Indeed, all churches change. It's just that some of them do it kicking and screaming and causing a lot of needless suffering along the way. But if you insist on the integrity of the individual's mind and conscience, then you are stuck both living with diversity and accepting change. The second consequence is that you will necessarily have more in common with any other religious community that affirms the same commitment to the truth of individual experience, no matter how different their scriptures or their ritual vocabulary, than you will with those who share your traditions but seek to impose uniformity. And that, I believe, is what finally brought the Unitarians and the Universalists together in the latter half of the 20th century. The principle of the necessary freedom of conscience in religion made them both so unlike other denominations that the institutional differences between them finally became irrelevant. The great hopes for growth within the united communities that accompanied the consolidation process were not destined to be realized, at least not in the first half century. Yet it seems to me that each tradition brought strengths to the Union without which perhaps neither of them would have survived the turbulent 60s and all the social and cultural changes that have surged over the world since then. In one sense, it doesn't matter to me. The disciplines of reason and freedom will arise in the midst of the most unpromising political and institutional settings because I believe they are inherent in our humanity and cannot be wholly suppressed for very long. They do not need to be called Unitarian Universalism or humanism or the Enlightenment to be still the grandest achievements of which our nature is capable. And I have complete faith in their persisting recurrence among this species, and it matters little what names we give them when they again return. At the same time, I also know that human suffering is made less whenever these values take institutional, political, and legal and religious form in our societies. And it is this awareness that makes me eager to give my life's work to serving those institutions. So another dimension of what the flaming chalice means to me is a reminder of my own ordination vows, as well as all those I have witnessed and affirmed over the years to carry forward this living tradition. Not because it is the only form that our highest and most enduring values can take, but because it is the one we know, the one we have in this place and moment of history, the one that can right now make those values real for ourselves and our fellow beings. 60 years ago, my parents and elders came together to dedicate themselves to a vision of religious community that did not yet exist. They decided that their two venerable traditions were better together, and they trusted that something new and vital would grow from that union if they themselves were bold and faithful to what they saw as their urgent tasks and the possibility of a free and universal fellowship of all humanity in the church that is to be. Together, they built a new community and discovered the power of an emerging symbol for that community's mission and identity, a symbol rooted in human creativity, compassion, and service. Today, we pause to remember their hopes and honor their work, to express our gratitude for the institution that they have bequeathed to us to tend and enjoy. We are here because, like them, we know that we are better together. Today, that institution asks for our continuing support so that we can help the most promising congregations and programs that are leading the way in growth and witness to our message in the world. Today, as every Sunday, our chalice offers a cheerful, steady, living flame, embodying for us the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fires of commitment. Without that symbol, without this congregation, those values would still exist, truth and community and commitment, but it would be harder to find them and name them and offer our contributions to making them real in our collective lives. And so I invite you now to join me in reading together the congregational response of commitment from the celebration of consolidation 60 years ago. May these words that These words are on the slide on your screen. May they inspire us to honor the 60 years that we have shared and renew our commitment to the future that will be our legacy for those who are to follow us. Join me, please. We, Unitarian Universalists, children of the Judeo-Christian heritage, inheritors of the wisdom of the universal prophets, eager to experience the insights of the great faiths of the world, open to all sources of inspiration, ancient and modern, determined to explore the boundless ocean of truth which lies about on every hand and on before, and welcoming into fellowship all people of whatsoever background of faith, here together on this anniversary of consolidation, conscious of the presence of the past and of our urgent tasks, dedicate ourselves anew to the free and universal fellowship of all humanity that is the church to be. We declare our allegiance to the Unitarian Universalist Association and pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our faith to its high purposes and sure upbuilding. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our minds and hearts until the time shall come when we will be together again. Tomorrow is unto humankind as a door to be opened or closed, as a journey, an adventure. Tomorrow is a springtime and a harvest time, and the grain to be gathered is life itself. Therefore, let us embrace what strength we have, whatever confidence and valor, so that our efforts may accumulate to end in fruition, and the world so long awaited become a world attained.
Shine,
for joining us in this celebration of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. We hope it has given you a new appreciation for our liberal religious identity and inspired you to deepen your own spiritual journey in community. We invite you to join us now for informal conversation and fellowship in our Zoom community connection. You can find the link here in the chat or at our All Souls website homepage. Don't forget to sign up for the next Sunday Plus meal and watch for the opportunity to join us in person in Bragg Auditorium as we begin returning to live services here next month. We hope that you will be with us here online next Sunday for Halloween, when we will look at the wisdom found in several spiritual traditions of the hungry ghost. Until then, remember to get your vaccine booster and your seasonal flu shot. Please, everyone, take care, stay safe, and be well this week.